and welcome back to another video. So I think last week, I guess on Saturday, I said that maybe today's video was going to be another watercoloring video rather than doing something in my sketchbook, because I did an alcohol marker drawing in my sketchbook for Saturday's video instead. But I decided that I was still kind of in that mood to do more alcohol marker drawings, just because I do feel like I go through phases of what I like to work with in my sketchbook in terms of like what medium. So we're going to kind of continue from almost like last week's session, where I kind of did like a very simple spread, kind of just like a headshot and a waist up kind of drawing of a character. I don't think I mentioned this properly in some of my previous videos more recently, is that I've kind of switched to the Uni Nano Dia color leads, because I've been using my multi-pencil more often for sketching whenever I need to use a colored lead, but I still really like using the Pilot color Eno and the color red as well. There is a little bit of a texture difference if anything, but I feel like the Uni Nano Dia color lead is a little bit more like smoother and creamier and kind of lays down a little bit more easily, while the one for the Pilot color Eno is just a little bit more almost like stiff. But enough about that. So let's move on to who I'm drawing and what I'm doing for this piece in general. So like I said, we are doing a sketchbook kind of spread with alcohol markers to kind of like prep my page. I already did my sketch in advance like I usually do, just to make sure that things look the way that I want to without having the pressure of having to make sure to keep everything in frame, or if the camera's catching even the lightness of the sketch at this point. But after the sketch, I go in directly with inking. So in the previous video, and I think in previous alcohol marker drawing videos where I've done more or less with inking with colored pens, I've used water-based markers. Now don't quote me on this, but this might not be the case for every marker combination or anything like that, but the water-based markers that I have from Magicfly worked really nicely with the Ohuhu markers. I think the alcohol markers don't really react with water-based markers. Like I said, don't quote me on that. You might want to do some testing on different kind of papers that you like to use alcohol markers with, but for the most part, I've been seeing that a lot of my water-based markers just don't react with the alcohol markers, which is great. And I find a lot of other markers that say that they're waterproof tend to even smudge and kind of pick up a lot of pigment whenever I use the alcohol markers. And I'm pretty sure it's because it depends on what's the main substance of the ink. So I find water-based doesn't react with alcohol, so it kind of works out well whenever I do these alcohol marker drawings. So in terms of who I'm drawing today, I don't remember if I'm going to be pronouncing his name correctly. I think it's Argenti. I don't think it's Argenti. I did play his kind of like introduction, I guess it's like story quest or whatever you want to call it, in Honkai Star Rail. So he is a Honkai Star Rail character, and he has this really luscious kind of red hair that's really bright and vibrant, and his majority of his attire is very much kind of like silver or just like general armor colored, and then kind of like gold trim around it, which I find a very interesting kind of like color scheme for me to work with, because even though I like working with like brighter colors, or I like drawing things that have, I guess like even if it has more muted colors, I try to add more vibrancy. But more recently, I've been thinking that I kind of struggle coloring red hair sometimes. I feel like I tackle it okay when I work digitally, but sometimes when I work on red hair traditionally, it's harder for me to find a good balance of making the hair stand out really nicely without making it look too pink or too orange or too peachy, because I like to have a gradient almost from like your mid-tone color to your lighter colors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually get into the hair coloring, because that's the main color of his hair. I decided to switch to kind of like a time-lapse mode for this. Also, I'm moving my sketchbook like that because I wanted to ink his face where I can see his face directly in front of me, and it's not going to be like horizontal on my desk, and kind of creating that perspective where I might elongate his face by accident. So hopefully for the rest of the video, you'll see kind of footage of me working on the larger one in real time and kind of like with choppier footage. And then for the smaller one, because usually I tend to move the sketchbook less if I'm working with a smaller one, I will put that in time lapse because it'll be a little bit less, I guess, like dizzying to people, if that's even a word. But I do apologize if I'm going to pronounce Argenti's name incorrectly the entire time, but I was recommended to draw him several times actually, ever since I've been posting more about, I guess like my sketchbook spreads where I pick usually 2 to 3 colors and I use like water-based markers and fill out an entire spread. And I mentioned that I wanted to draw somebody with kind of like turquoise or teal with kind of red, if anything, because I really like that color combination and how bold it is. But because of how bold it is, I'm very nervous to even work with that color combination. But I think because I mentioned the color red as well as something that I wanted to work with, a lot of people actually were asking if I could draw this character, and I was a little bit apprehensive because I didn't meet the character into the story like until way later, because I've been playing Honkai Star Rail at a very slow pace in terms of like, I guess like the story and events, if anything, but I do try to finish it before the next patch comes out, so I'm a little bit late on this. But right now, so I already went ahead and erased my sketch a little bit, but I decided to keep some of the lines back in, so I'm putting the little hair highlights or little sparkles in his hair design. But after that, we can prep for coloring. So I'm actually cleaning this with rubbing alcohol just because some people did warn me that this can reactivate if your paper is like thin and you oversaturate the paper, so it might stain the backside of your next sheet. But we can move on to using the alcohol markers. So I'm still continuing to use the Ohuhu Honolulu 320 alcohol markers. Now you're gonna see that I'm going to be putting the little color swatch selection of the markers that I've used for each section on the screen right here, just because I get a lot of questions that I don't know how to properly answer because I usually don't remember what markers I used for which part of the drawing. So hopefully this helps a little bit, and I tried my best to organize the markers from lightest to darkest in terms of how I layered up the markers. So this time I decided to use the Y110 for kind of like the base tone of his entire face, but what I'm doing right now is using, I think it's either R080 or R18 as kind of like the little color I'm layering on his face first before using my lightest tone to kind of blend everything out. So as we work on different sections for this larger one, I'm gonna put all the little markers like this in the corner so you have something to reference if you wish to use some similar colors, if anything, because I never do remember, and I can't answer the question because I never remember the color selection that I tend to use, because it tends to differ depending on the character I'm drawing or how I'm feeling that day and how accurate I want to color the character, I guess. So I think I mentioned in the Charlotte video that the initial base tone that I was using for her skin tone was actually running out because I used that one quite a bit, and it's mostly because it's one of the lightest colors in the set, so I use it a lot to blend out a lot of the colors if I want to kind of like transition to white or something a little bit lighter. So to kind of buffer my mid-tone colors to white, I like having a lot of different lighter colors to kind of fill in that space, and that one tends to be one of the ones I usually use the most. So because I don't want to drain it completely at this point, I'm probably going to buy a replacement if I decide to continue working with alcohol markers. So that's kind of the reason why I switched over to using the kind of more yellowy base for this one, because it kind of fit the, in terms of like value wise, what I wanted, but it was a little bit more yellowy rather than pink or peach, which is what I would have liked to use for his skin tone, because it was a little bit more cooler rather than this one that seems a lot warmer, and his hair and stuff is going to be very warm, so I was a little bit afraid that everything was going to be too warm in temperature, but I think in the end it turned out okay. Can someone please tell me what color is this guy's eyes? I kind of forgot to go into the game and kind of go through the character archive so I could kind of zoom in on his model to check out what exactly is his eye color, because the references that I was using, it was a little bit hard to determine whether or not his eyes were just like green normally and his pupil is red, because I've seen like chibi artwork of him, which I think is the official one, that shows that his upper half of his eyes tend to be a little bit more of a dark indigo or even a purple. So that's kind of what I went with, which might explain why I have such a weird array of colors for the eyes this time, rather than something simple where like last time when I was working on Charlotte's piece, it was more or less just greens, blues, and kind of like turquoise to kind of help transition those colors a little bit. But for his eyes, it was a little bit difficult for me to figure out how I wanted to kind of like color them in, because I started off with a light green base and then I decided to use a little bit of a yellowy green in the middle, but I decided to cover it up because it looked less green that way, especially after I put in the purple and the red of the pupil. So I feel like it doesn't look entirely correct. I feel like I should have pushed up the purple a little bit higher so that more green comes through. Hopefully his eyes don't look too different, I guess. So other than the face, which I'm going to be kind of just saying that it's the eyes and kind of like the skin area, that tends to be my favorite for coloring, but where I can kind of have the most fun in terms of like adding colors and trying my best to blend as much as I can tends to be the hair, if anything. And like I mentioned, red hair and just like red in general, sometimes I feel like I struggle to color a lot. And it might be because I have a specific like color palette that I like to lean the red into, and it might, I don't know if it reads like correctly every time. So you can see on the bottom right here, the colors I chose for his hair, which kind of is like, I guess like 5 different reds, which happen to be in the middle. I have more of a peach tone and kind of that skin color again, so that I can help transition some of the hair strands that are closer to his face to be a lot softer. And then on the right side of my color palette, I have purples and blues. So usually when I like to deepen the hair color or add more color into red hair, I oftentimes like using blues and purples to this, but I was worried about picking the wrong blues and matching it with certain reds. So I don't know if people are aware of this, but you know, if you mix a red and a blue, yes, you're gonna get purple of some sort, but depending on like what pigments make up your red and what pigments make up your blue color, I guess like it will definitely alter the different kind of purple that you would get. So I was scared of making the hair too muddy and brown, so I was trying my best to pick blues that I think were a little bit more on the cooler side, so it match a little bit easier and wouldn't make it look too brown, rather than just making it purple, because purple tends to be my go-to in terms of making the shadow for red hair to be a little bit more deeper and kind of to create that depth. But another reason why I feel like I struggle with red hair sometimes is because I don't want to lose that vibrancy that like kind of like what red hair has. Like it's very punchy in your face and I love how vibrant it is, but whenever I try to fade it out, I'm worried of making it look too pink or making it look too orange, because the lighter the red gets, it kind of leans one way or the other. So I did become a little bit timid when I was coloring in the hair where it got closer to the face, because I didn't want it to be too orange, if anything. And I made sure to keep that one section of his upper right bang, like I guess like on the right side of the page is what I'm gonna refer to, left and right, rather than if he was actually his left and his right. So the right portion of his bangs that comes really close to his eyes, it's like a gradation from almost like a warmer-ish pink, or I guess like skin tone or white, that transitions and kind of goes in a gradient all the way to red. So I remember to do it here, and I think it turns out okay, and I hope it looks deliberate and not just like me looking like I was the one who omitted the color there. But on the smaller one, I am gonna forget to do that because I was coloring the hair very quickly, so I forgot to leave that kind of like more or less untouched. So as I'm kind of like adding a lot of the kind of deeper parts of the hair so I can kind of like section it off so it doesn't read too flat, I am trying my best to go from either using the darker red, which is reading more like maroon colored, and then I would switch to kind of any of the kind of blues and purples that I decided to choose for the hair. And you can see that I was trying to do something where I was trying to layer the blue into the hair so that it would create almost more of a, I don't know how to explain it. it's like similar to the premise of using like atmospheric perspective, where if something is farther away from you, it gets lighter in color and kind of gets more like dreamier and airier. And I've seen people do this for hair, for people who have like, I don't know, like thicker hair, or like hair kind of creating a certain kind of silhouette between the neck and maybe any side pieces of the hair, where you want to push it back but you don't want to make it continuously darker. And I've done this in the past digitally, but traditionally with alcohol markers, I think I realized too late, so it was a little bit harder for me to layer up those blues and purples on top of the red without just continually darkening it. So there are some areas where he just has a little bit of streaks of blue rather than it being kind of like faded into his hair appropriately, I guess. It was an attempt, and maybe in the future I can try again if I draw another person who has like that similar kind of hair situation, I guess, because it's not going to work for every character. Like shorter hair characters probably won't work as nicely for this, but it kind of works for him if I could have executed it properly, I guess. So for the armor, I'm just gonna breeze on through because I don't think it's very exciting. I didn't color it very well, in my opinion. I feel like I was very timid in terms of trying to color it because I didn't really use a proper reference for armor, and metals and shiny objects are like of that smoother texture. I feel like I do struggle with if I don't have an appropriate reference, because I don't know what colors to place in there where it makes it look more appropriate. So I stuck with a lot of neutrals. I added a lot of cool tones. I tried to knock it back a little bit by adding a little bit of that skin tone into some of the areas to make it kind of more balanced between neutral and cool, and not making it just entirely blue and purple. So before we move on to kind of like the time-lapse portion of the smaller one, I am coloring the roses. And I kind of threw these in last minute because I wasn't expecting for me to get so tired of just trying to find references of his outfit. So I decided to use some roses to kind of cut off the kind of waist up torsoed one, because I wanted to cover up as much of the armor as I could, because I knew I was going to get tired of either inking it or even coloring it. So it's a little bit of a cop-out, but I think it kind of just fits because it fits his character in general, because this guy's more like, I love beauty. He's kind of like, I guess like a romantic character, I guess, if anything. He's a little silly, but I do like his character. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna summon for him, as there's like only a few days I think remaining for their banner, I think, or a week left or something. I don't really remember. So I'm probably gonna continue to save in Honkai Star Rail. But if you guys are also playing Star Rail, do let me know who you're planning to summon for. I know upcoming, I think Ran Mei is coming out, but there's like a whole slew of different characters coming out super soon since we're getting a new area, and I'm super excited. So yeah, hopefully I'll do a little bit more fan art of some of the upcoming Honkai Star Rail characters, or some of the previous ones that I haven't gotten to tackle quite yet, and maybe even some redemption pieces, because I don't know, I feel like I want to draw Dan Heng again, just like the normal Dan Heng. I guess we'll see where I end up with any of my fan art for this fandom. But this is where I was kind of playing around with that kind of transitioning of the blue again, and I think I should have layered pink with the blue and used a softer kind of like my initial red to kind of transition the red into the blue again, rather than tackling it with kind of my mid-tone red, because it makes it look very splotchy, because there's not really a good transitioning color if my paper and my markers aren't going to blend very nicely together anyways. But because of that, I kind of just decided to cover it up. I think I could have just left it as like a light lavender purple rather than trying to layer up the reds into it, and it would have had a similar effect. But because it looks so jarring, I decided to cover it up with the red. So I just didn't really want to reattempt that part. But if I end up doing another character, or I draw Argenti, don't know how to say his name, nor do I know where to emphasize certain portions of his name. So yeah, if I do reattempt him, maybe I'll try again, or maybe I'll do a watercolor piece or something. But I think that's it in terms of the alcohol marker process for me. I hopefully will also be doing more in the future, but I would like to get back into gouache painting because as much as I like using the alcohol markers and I love the vibrancy of the colors and just having an easy access to having a lot of colors at once and not having to worry about like finding the correct color because it does have such a large range, I would like to start getting back into gouache soon and stop being afraid of being so rusty and not being able to kind of like move past making mistakes, I guess, because like I said, sometimes if I have a successful time with one medium, I tend to continue with that medium because I know it's gonna work out well, but it's kind of bad because I'm kind of sticking within my comfort zone again, and I know something like gouache is going to, I don't know, test my patience a little bit, also challenge my color theory more because I'll have to learn more about mixing paints again, and I want to just build up my tolerance in terms of working on longer pieces again, especially when I'm filming, because I don't know if it's just like the mood of the holidays or I want to take a break or something, I'm not too sure, but a lot of my digital pieces recently I have not been finishing, which is part of the reason why for Saturday's video I ended up scrapping and I decided to do a traditional art video instead. So I hope you guys don't mind that if every so often I end up being too bogged down with not being able to finish a digital piece, I will switch to traditional and post it as kind of like the main video rather than just on Monday's video. So hopefully that's okay. So I think that's it for the spread for today though. So hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me do another spread in my sketchbook with alcohol markers, and I'll definitely do some in the future again, and I'll try my best to pick some other characters because we've done kind of two characters that are more or less red focused, but maybe I can do Hua Hua. And maybe we can do something a little bit more green and teal and kind of that color sort. We'll see what happens. Maybe I'll do it in gouache, who knows. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!